What's up, y'all? It's your dude Born Shining here. Welcome. I'm gonna mix things up a little bit. Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Ra, the universal life force, great creator, spirit which moves through all things, archangels and ascended masters, spirit guides, spirit animals, ancestors and crossover loved ones, and all my friends known and unknown, seen and unseen. And normally I would say we're all born shining, um, but lately I've had a little bit of a difference of opinion on that. My opinion has changed on this idea that we're all born shining. And that's not to say that I've gotten any less positive. I think I've just gotten a little bit more um, realistic to the evidence. Now, the paradox of that is that even these people who may seem dysfunctional are still moving everything forward in their own special way. Um, and maybe we'll get back more into that in a little bit. But I just wanted to say, this video is really about some of the things that have been happening in the world and how that relates to my personal life and what I think is going on and what I think can be done about it. Um, I've been following world events since I was a child, and that's because my parents were in the military, and so that was just kind of comes with the territory. Um, an awareness of what's happening around the world um, on maybe a little bit of a deeper level. Um, but regardless, I was impacted by world events in a unique way. And since I was a child, it has been a part of my reality. And over the last few years, specifically the last 2 years, um, but probably since maybe around like 2018, I had this epiphany, and I'm going to share a little bit about that with you. Um, when I was going through school, when I was studying at the university, studying political science, uh, I learned to do research and how to find information that you can really hang your hat on, you know. I mean, as best as one can. And what I mean by that is finding information that would confirm that there's an awareness of things that are happening um, that are beyond speculation. And what I mean by that is, um, for example, when I was looking into the foreign policy of the United States, especially right around 9/11, um, my senior project, which I didn't start until my senior year, but the material for that paper was starting to present itself a little bit before that, a couple of years before that. And when I was looking into the foreign policy of the United States, one of the things that I noticed was that there was kind of a self admittance by the government that there was an inherent flaw that seemed to contradict the mission. And so, this whole like war on terror, uh, at the time, I mean, we're talking like 2004, 2004, when I was doing a lot of this digging. this information. And so, like around 2004, I started looking into the U.S. foreign policy, and had a hunch that it was making us less safe and that it wasn't working. I mean, it's just kind of common sense, but it seemed to me. But when you're making arguments and presenting information to people, you really need a little bit more to go on. And so when I started looking into it, I started finding like, oh, the United States government actually knows that its foreign policy is creating more quote unquote terrorists. So why would it continue to take it the same actions, knowing that it wasn't really effective? And this started to unravel things for me, and it led me down a path of looking for these kinds of things, where people, and when I say people, I mean people in the government, with the government and these other institutions and things that a lot of people would claim as legitimate sources or authority, um, where they admit what's going on. And the more I learned, there was another example where I was doing a presentation about containment during during the Cold War, the U.S. strategy of containment, and came across some information about Vietnam and the what was it? There was there was an event off the coast of Vietnam that was pretty much the whole reason for that war. There was a ship, I believe it was the. Hold on, let me look. Yeah, exactly, it was the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and um, I didn't know it at the time, but it's become clear since that Jim Morrison, the singer of the Doors, his father was, I believe, the admiral or the brigadier general or whatever of the ship that was in the Gulf of Tonkin. But anyways, um, what I learned at that time, and I put it in my presentation, and ultimately, I think it was one of the reasons why I failed the course, was because my teacher was a veteran, and he didn't want to hear that. So yeah, the Gulf of Tonkin was a false flag. It's what I would call now a false flag. And many years later, I actually met someone who was in the military, an older gentleman at the time. He was probably in his 60s. Um, he told me about an experience where he was being sent over there. And as he was being deployed to that region, he was interacting with people who were being relieved from that situation. And they were telling him, this is not, it didn't, something's up, it didn't go down that way, the way that we've been told, something's going on. And so many years later, this information that I found in school, um, and this was maybe like 2013. So 10 years, maybe a decade after I was out of school, or at least through this class, um, this information came to me in a very, it just came into my experience. And so as was going through school and learning about all of these things, it really started to raise a lot of questions, like why would people be doing things that clearly don't work, or why would people be lying about things, um, in order to, perpetuate these conflicts because we're on the on the other side of the spectrum. We're also told that like we're trying to maintain peace and all of these kinds of things, but it's really bizarre. Not so it's not bizarre now, but I mean it was bizarre. It was very confusing. Like, I mean, my parents were in the military. You know, they were in the military before I was born, and I was born to a soldier. And my mom being a Marine, um, and when I fully realized what it is that she did, I figured like, hey, maybe well, if we didn't have war, maybe I get to hang out with my mom. Maybe these people don't have to go do this stuff. And it didn't really make a lot of sense at the time how, on the one hand, we're we're fighting for peace, yet also, a lot of the people who were advocating for peace would turn up dead. And I'm talking about Mahatma Gandhi. I'm talking about Martin Luther King Jr. There's a lot of people who that don't make the history books who advocate for peace that ended up being assassinated. And as I started learning more and more and going down the rabbit holes, so to speak, um, during the 2008 financial crisis and learning about the banking system and learning about, and surprisingly, or not surprisingly, this wasn't stuff that I was taught in school. I mean, it was a political science major, international relations and comparative politics, and the idea of the Federal Reserve not even being um, a part of the government, the IRS not even being a part of the government, never came up. And I wouldn't be shocked or surprised to learn that these people who were my teachers wouldn't know that. And, there's a reason for that. And it's not because they're ignorant, it's because, when we accept a lot of things as true, we tend to not scrutinize them. But, anyways, the more I learned about all of these things and started learning about what's going on and how there seems to be a real contradiction between the stated agenda or the stated intentions versus the outcomes of a lot of these things. It starts to get pretty. It starts to weigh on you. The more you learn, about what's going on in the world and how bad things are and all of this kind of stuff. Especially when you're stuck in an echo chamber, uh, you're listening to the news because again, you know, when I was in school, one of the things they said was you want to be up to date and informed on what's going on in the world, and you need to read the newspaper every day. You need to watch the news all the time. You need to stay up to date. But they failed to tell us at the same in the same breath that the media, the relationship between the intelligence agencies and the media. And so anyways, the more you learn about these kinds of hidden things, which aren't even really hidden that well. It's not, I mean, it's not like, it's not that hidden. It's more that people don't believe it. Get my wallet out here. So it's not a question of whether or not these things are true. It's just a question, it's more of a question of do people believe it? And for me, in my in my unique perspective on all of this and my unique relationship to all this information and how it impacted my personal life, it impacted my relationship with my parents, it impacted the time I got to spend with them, it it impacted me. I mean, let's not kid around. These world events, they shape everybody's lives. um, I just happen to have a little bit of a different relationship with all of this stuff. And so as I started going down these rabbit holes and trying to explain things to people as I came across this information, it's like the more I learned, the more isolated I became. And the more challenging it was to connect with people on a sense of an agreed upon reality. Like, and that was just in my personal life. And now I know there's a lot of people out in the world who see what's going on. And so kind of informally able to connect with these people and share some kind of consensus about like what's happening in the world. So anyways, fast forward to 2018, and this is how it's starting to, hopefully I'll do a good job of tying it all together. 2018, I was out in Austin, Texas. I was playing the drums for a band, and with the hopes of, you know, making that a thing. It didn't end up panning out, but anyways, I was working at a restaurant down there in Austin, and if you're ever in Austin, by the way, you get to go to a place called Kebabalicious. I highly recommend it. The owners are amazing. The food is great. Um, it's just really good people. I loved working there. And so while I was working there, I was away from at the time, I only had one daughter, my oldest daughter, and she was fairly young. And so I'm wrestling with all this stuff, and emotionally, and I knew I had learned some things up until that point. And so one of the things that I had learned was this this idea of social media and Facebook, and I had mixed feelings about it. And so at one point I had kind of I had turned off my account, my Facebook account. And maybe like a week later, I just got this feeling that I need to turn it back on. And so I did. And one of the first things coming through my feed, because I had just moved a few months prior from Northern California down to Austin, and I was living in a place called Chico, which is actually right down the street, literally like 3 or 4 miles away from Paradise. So that's where the Paradise fires were, and the campfire, as they call it. And so I'm looking through my feed, and I see people talking about this fire, and they're talking about how people were in their cars and people had to run from this fire, you know? And being that my daughter and my ex wife were in Chico, which is just a few miles away from Paradise, um, I was concerned. Um, Never got a call. I had to call them. I had to call my ex wife. Like, she didn't call me to let me know what was going on. She didn't call me to let me know the uh, status of my child. I had to call her, and she knew about it long before I did, because when I found out about it, it was already going on. Um, I think it might have even been over. Anyways, um, I got really scared. I wanted to see my daughter and be around my daughter, and so I went back to Chico um, around Thanksgiving of 2018. I went back to Chico, and I started looking into the things that people were saying about the campfire, the people who were there, because I knew those people. I didn't know everyone, but I was working in Paradise. I had known people in Paradise. I was there um, before I left frequently. Um, and so when I heard what people were saying about these lasers and flashes of light in the sky and all of these kinds of things, I did a lot of digging, and I really started looking into what people were saying, and I was way more receptive, probably the most receptive like I've ever been, um, to new information, and just really confident in my abilities to figure out my own make my own assessments of what's going on. And the more I learned, um, the more compelling it became. And I started watching videos and looking into all of these things. And it got to a point where it was so, and yeah, we're talking about the directed energy weapons. We're talking about a lot of gnarly shit that it fucked me up, you know? It fucked me up. It was like learning about it had a flavor of the whole financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, when you learn about how the banks work and how the Federal Reserve works and its relationship to the government and money and all of these kinds of things. It it sent me in a tailspin, and it was challenging to get out of. Um, but I did, and I just kind of went back to life, and tried to fit in and do my thing and maintain, just keep on keeping on. And, part of the thing is like when you learn about these things, like I said, it makes it hard to have any kind of consensus with other people, and it makes it really isolating. Um, you get really isolated mentally because you're not really forming genuine connections with people. It's really hard to connect with people who don't want to hear about that, you know? They don't want to hear about it, they don't want to see it, they don't believe it. It's like they either write you off, they try to call you crazy, they dismiss you, they marginalize you, and so it's easier to just kind of stay at the surface if you can. For some people, it's easy, and you just kind of try to assimilate into the culture and society as best you can because you still got to make a living, you know. Um, and so, when I moved back to Chico and I started doing all this digging and I started asking people questions and I started physically, like I physically went to paradise and I physically looked at the trees and I went to a house that I used to work at and I went and I looked around, and it just was so obvious to me. I saw a lot of trees that were the root balls. The trees had been burned. The root ball of the tree was burned. And if you've ever cut down a tree, or if you know anything about trees, you know that that is it's a hard thing to do. And I know that they're saying that this was a wildfire, and I know that they say that sometimes these fires start in the ground and they spread through the ground, and they heat up and they spread through the ground. But here's the thing about paradise was that the ground was so hard in paradise they didn't even have a good plumbing or water system, you know? So basically they want you to believe, the people who are perpetuating this story of how this wildfire moved through the ground, they want you to believe that even though the town of Paradise wasn't really able to have a functioning plumbing system, which means that it was hard to get into the ground because it was so hard and compacted, that fire was able to move through the ground to burn all of these root balls of trees. But when I looked at these trees, it was like they were split open from they were busted open. There was so much they had busted open. I don't know how else to say it. It's like when you cook a hot dog for too long, you know what I mean? And the hot dog splits. That's what was happening to these trees. But the trees were still in the ground, a lot of them. and they blame it on lightning. But when you look around and you see every tree has um, the same features, burned at the root ball, kind of split open, and they're explaining to you that it's lightning. That's not even what's the probability that lightning hit every tree that you can physically see, or when you see pictures of homes burning from the inside out. Meanwhile, the vegetation around the home is still intact. I mean, there's so much to it, but needless to say, one of the biggest things for me was this idea, you know, the guy that I worked at an apartment complex. I was managing an apartment complex, and the maintenance guy, his son was a first responder at Polga, which is where this thing started. And so I asked him, you know, I said, "Hey, man, was there any like?" And I didn't know this before I asked him the question. It's like, "Hey, have you heard anything weird about this fire? Like, anything out of the ordinary, or is there anything strange about it to you?" And he said, "Well, it just so happens that my son is a first responder, firefighter, fire medic, and he was one of the first on the scene at Polga. And he said that the son said, when I showed up at Polga, there was no smoke, there was no fire, and 10 minutes later, he said that it was raining fire. You know, and when he said that, it just really it struck me because that was at the tail end of all the research and stuff that I had done, and or like towards the end of it. And it's like these people, these first responders, they do not use, like, if it's he's not going to say it's raining fire if it's a little fire. You know what I mean? Like, if it's just a little fire, he's going to say, like, "Oh, yeah, it was a little fire and we got it contained and it was no big deal," or, "Yeah, it was a house fire." He used the phrase raining fire out of nowhere, from no smoke to raining fire. All right. And so when you've had in a situation where your your family is in jeopardy, and people who have lost homes, and there's been structural damage, and people lost their lives. A lot of people lost their lives, way more than they said. um, you just start it all combined, all this information combined to create this true feeling of hopelessness. Like, how do you even go about, first of all, how do you defend yourself from that? How do you protect yourself from that? You know, I mean, there's other stories too of, like, just entire towns being erased in minutes. I mean, not just hours, like, we're talking minutes, man. Like, things moving so fast, and you hear these fire captains and people talking about how fire is evolved, and fire has a new, there's, like, they have to change their strategies because the fires are burning so hot and they're moving so fast. And you see all of these things developing, and it's like, what do you do? You know? And around that time, I was introduced to this idea of reintroduced to this idea of the hero's journey. And that really kind of put everything into perspective for me. And it allowed me a choice. I was able to make a choice at that point. I was able to make a choice and choose where I wanted to put my focus, and what did I want to focus on. And for a long time already, I had been focusing on solutions to problems. But, coming into this new awareness of the power of your story, it really drove home for me. I dug in, I doubled down on the story that I want to tell and the things that I want to focus on and the kind of life that I want to create for myself, my children, my future generations, my community. And I doubled down on my insistence that I am going to focus on what I want to create. And I'm not going to go down these rabbit holes and focus on the destruction, focus on the things that are outside of my control, and focus on all of this negative, dark shit. It's good to be aware of. And, the point here is that when that's what you're focusing on, it doesn't really allow, you can't focus on two things at the same time. You can't be focusing on a lot of this dark shit and also focusing on the solutions and the things that are going to, you can't focus on what you don't want and focus on what you do want. Even though when you see what you don't want, it is inspiring you to what you do want. Like when you see destruction, you inherently want the opposite of that, you know? And if you're focusing on what you do want, then inherently, unless unless you have some kind of weird programming, you're inherently going to want to improve that. And so, but it's still, it's impossible to focus on the negative, the dark side of things, and also be focusing on the solutions. And so I had known for a while about all of these solutions that I had found. I had found many solutions, and I wasn't the beginning of my spiritual journey, um, or my introduction to holistic medicine or any of these things, but it reinforced the importance of focusing on what I wish to see more of. And so that's what I did. I started focusing on what I want to see more of, and I started focusing and being more selective with who I give my time and my attention to. I started being more selective about the things that I read. I started paying more attention to what I want to see more of instead of what I want to see less of. And fast forward to now, I'm in a much better place to be able to offer solutions, what I see as solutions, make suggestions about how to go about, um, remedying this these catastrophes and a lot of the things that are happening. And I know there's a lot of people out there who already know what I'm talking about. Um, and and I've said it before in a lot of videos, but if this is your first video, the solutions already exist. The solutions are already in existence, and they've been in existence, and there's been people who suppress the technology, but it's not just, but it's so much more than that. It's not just about these technologies that they've suppressed. It's about the gaslighting, and it's about, on the one hand, these institutions, the government, these international organizations. On the one hand, they're going to tell you that things aren't happening that are happening. They're going to gaslight the shit out of you. And then on the other hand, they're going to use information from the research that they've done to control you. And at the same time, they're going to tell you, they're going to allow you and encourage you to live in in the past. They're going to encourage you. They're going to try to keep you in the dark about scientific advancements and how the human body works, how the human mind works. And interestingly, a lot of these things don't even require technology. It's just, it's all, there's always paradoxes. And so even though the technology has allowed us to take measurements and be more refined in our ability to understand the human body and our physical reality, which is even a blurry line because these technologies are showing us that everything is energy. uh, the human body is equipped. We've had this technology forever. You know, the human body hasn't changed very much in the last many years, so it's not new in that sense. What we've been capable of, but becoming aware of what you're capable of is something different altogether. And having faith and putting your intention and belief behind what you're capable of is something different altogether. And so, I just want to mention briefly, a lot of the stuff that's happening right now in California, stuff that's happened in Hawaii, on Maui, you know, these these kinds of incidents aren't an accident. There's no accidents. Nothing happens in this universe by accident. Causal. It's causal. It comes from somewhere. And while it is a little bit more of a stretch to say exactly where it comes from, that it's happening is undeniable. But that's just part of the story, you know? Because the way around this, really, the way that we can overcome these challenges is not by ignoring it, but by giving more attention to the things that we want to see. And so that means that we have to unplug from the things that we don't want to see. And just like if you're in a bad relationship on an interpersonal level, the same type of evolution that somebody needs to go through to have an inner awareness of who they are, what they stand for. They need to have strong boundaries, personal boundaries with people in their life. Stop, somebody's treating you like shit, you move away from that person. you know you don't need to stand there and argue with that person. You need to just get away from that person. you know and depending on the severity of the issue, you may need to take certain steps. But in this situation, because it's our government withdrawing, what does putting up a boundary look like? It means not giving them, like, our focus, our energy. It's like people participate in this system out of fear. Nobody's participating in this system because it's yielding positive results. you know Everybody that I could imagine, they do things because they don't want to get in trouble, out of fear of getting audited by the IRS, or being taken to court by the IRS, or um, you know driving without insurance, or driving without your license. It's like they use fear to get people to comply with these things. And I'm not saying that, insurance is definitely a good thing to have. But at the same time, I know instances where people have had insurance and they've been in accidents and the insurance companies fucked them over. And so what I'm saying is, there needs to, in order for things to change, you have to change. And we have to change. You know what I mean? We have to set our own boundaries, and we have to draw the line somewhere. Like, how long are we going to, like, it seems the ultimate, what do they say? Insanity is when you keep doing the same thing and you expect different results. I mean, I don't personally care who the president is. I really don't. I don't care who the president is. And I know that I've said a lot of things about Donald Trump, and you know, I at this point, I just think that they all need to go. You know what I mean? They all need to go. And I'm not saying anywhere in particular, but I'm just saying that the government itself is it's flawed, people. It's flawed. It's flawed. I mean, the government allegedly was established of the people, by the people, for the people. Meanwhile, it's like vampirizing people. It's vampirizing their ability to have any sort of to be able to dictate their own autonomy. They're vampirizing the environment while also saying, tightening down the restrictions on civil liberties and personal freedoms, that the majority of the violators are corporations and big business and the government itself. And so my suggestion is to and withdraw your participation. You know what I mean? Withdraw your participation from this system, because like I said, insanity is continuing to do the same thing and expecting different results. It's like no matter who's in office, no matter what party is in office, things things are getting worse. And even with Donald Trump, and I know that there's people out there who are going to say this. There's this 5D chess match and numbers, the 17th letter of the alphabet and all this kind of stuff. But what I'm saying is, when Donald Trump was in office, he fast tracked a vaccine that was knowingly harmful. You know, as well as a lot of other things that are very suspect. And so at this point, I don't trust any of them. I don't trust any of them because there's there's no way, based on what I know, there's no way that anybody could be participating in this system that, what do they say, guilty by association. Guilty by association, I mean, you'd have to check the voting records, you know what I mean, to see who's really been working for the people, and take it on a case by case basis. But on a whole, the government is extremely dangerous and not working in the best interest of the people. And I'm sure that doesn't just apply to the United States government. So so what do we do? All of these resources that we keep giving to the government, all of this energy that they get from people, this especially the emotional energy. People get sick from watching the news. People get sick from it, has an impact on their health from daily from observing this shit happening on a daily basis. There's still all kinds of anxiety and trauma and PTSD and all of this stuff just from watching the fucking news and just from keeping up on what's going on. And that's not healthy. But it's not healthy for several reasons. Physically, it's not healthy, but it's also not healthy to keep doing something that clearly doesn't work. You know what I mean? It clearly doesn't work. It's like if you're trying to use a banana as a nail, you know what I mean? And you're trying to build a planter box, and you're trying to use a banana as a nail, and you keep hitting this banana with a hammer and it's not working, and you just keep doing it and doing it, and it's like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense to keep listening to these people, to be watching the news. It doesn't make any sense to be paying for these results. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Right? And so rather than expecting the government to change, because that's not going to happen before there is a consensus among the citizens who are demanding a very specific outcome. And also, getting this consensus is going to allow us to hold this government accountable for what they're doing. But you can't do that. That's not possible before you're willing to do that in your own life. You know what I mean? Like you can't try to hold other people accountable when you yourself aren't willing to be held accountable to yourself. And so it's this process that it starts with you. It starts with you, the individual, like you, just making better decisions for your health, making better decisions for not just for your physical health, but for your mental health, because those two things are very closely related. They're inseparable, in fact, your mental health and your physical health. And seeking out the tools that will help you make those kinds of changes. And it might be a journey. It is a journey, and it's going to be a journey for everybody. Everybody's path is going to look a little bit differently. Everybody's going to have a different road to get to that place. But we're not looking for perfection. We're looking for progress. We're not looking for everybody to heal themselves in a week. We're looking for people to begin to take accountability for their own lives. And from this place, can we move forward and start expecting accountability and holding the government accountable, and starting to really kind of um, hold people accountable for what they're doing. I mean, with all this technology, there's better ways of doing things. We don't have to keep using the banana as a nail. And along those lines, this when this country was created, we were fleeing a a monarchy. You know, this country was started by people who wanted the ability to live life on their own terms, and over time, it it has been usurped by the same people that we left all those years ago. Not just the monarchy, but the bankers, the financial institutions. They have infiltrated the government, and they have bought people off, and they've created all kinds of conflicts, internal conflicts that have divided the country and made the ground fertile for them to take it over. And you can go look. Many presidents talk about the banks, and then at a certain point it stops. And it was right around when the Federal Reserve was created, and so I think in like 1913 or something like that. So it starts with you. It starts with you. It starts with me. It starts with everybody taking stock of where they're at and where they want to be, and realizing that they don't have to participate in things that don't make sense. And how do you know when something makes sense beyond what people say? There's different types of intelligence. There's logic, but then you also have a knowing, like a sense of knowing. And I know that not everybody is really connected to this part of themselves, but even people who are seemingly disconnected from their intuition use language like, "Oh, I had a gut feeling," or um, even just talking about feelings like, "Oh, that felt wrong," or "I thought that might happen," or "I knew that would happen." If you listen to the words that people use, even if they're not considering themselves a psychic, they're still using language that would indicate that these people are aware of an intelligence that goes beyond the five senses, the five physical senses. So really what it comes down to is being aware of how you feel, and ultimately that's how you escape this prison of not just your mind but your nervous systems, and all these traumas, and all of this invisible um, these invisible uh, restraints, these triggers that are used against us, that a large part have been programmed into us that they use to control us. And yeah, so a lot of these, there's so many tools available. There's so many tools available. And, so like, so this is what I mean. When I'm talking about like outcomes, what do I mean? I'm talking about how take any cancer study people, any cancer study people, or groups or businesses or nonprofits or whatever, you know, I know at least, I mean, off the top, I know a handful of people, not maybe not personally, but through different healing modalities and on this journey, I've come across many people who have beaten their cancer. And so while it may not be accurate to say there is a cure for cancer, you know, uh, there is a cure for cancer. How could there not be a cure for cancer if they know what makes people sick? It's just not talked about. And even if it is talked about, people don't believe it. But I'm telling you, cancer is not, it's it's an illusion. This idea of not having a cure for cancer is an illusion. This idea of not knowing how to improve the environment is an illusion. There's so many lies that we're taught that people buy into because they just don't know any better. And some people just keep going with it because there's the alternative is really hard. Like I said before, it's really it's challenging to live as an awakened being in a world or community or a household where you're made to feel like you're crazy because you don't want to live a certain way. But the truth is the truth, you know? It doesn't change. The truth doesn't change just because the people you're around don't want to believe it. And so it starts with us as individuals and how what do we want to focus on and withdrawing our consent, where all these resources just take these vaccines for example. All the money that's gone into vaccine research in the whole vaccine industry could have been used to make infrastructure changes that would have create and food uh, advancements in food, or even just making healthy food more readily available for people and making nutrition an aspect of the healthcare plan. All this money that's gone into vaccine research and all of this shit, they could have done a lot to take away or put a dent in these communicable diseases and all of these kinds of things, have and strengthen immune systems and XYZ. They're just not about it, you know? And I'll be the first to admit, there is some kind of dark agenda that's going on, but fighting against that is not the way to solve the problem. It's like a Chinese finger trap because the more you focus on these people and the more you fight them, the more power you give them. And so the idea is to remove your, just, for starters, maybe just ignoring these people until you get a handle on your triggers and you're able to see from a larger perspective, a higher perspective, how these people have helped us to evolve. Because without these people doing their heinous shit, who would be trying to make things better? You know what I mean? It's the fact that the environment is going down, so they say. It's the fact that the environment has become so polluted and all this climate change shit that people have been searching for better ways to do things. I feel, it's the fact that so many people are getting sick that have pushed people to find new ways to heal themselves and others. And so it's while I don't advocate of what these people do, I don't condone their behavior, I don't approve of their behavior. In a weird way, they have contributed to a lot of these solutions coming forth, and it's just really a testament to how loving people are and how driven humans are and can be to to find solutions. Like it's a testament to our intelligence, and it's a testament to our creativity and our ability capacity to overcome and evolve. And and when people come together and they start looking at the results, and that's how you know, that's the measure of whether something is where they're taking you, is the results. If things keep getting worse, why would you keep listening to these people who are offering their two pennies? You know what I mean? These so-called experts, you know. Meanwhile, these people are doing all kinds of other, like AI is advancing and all of this other stuff is like making progress, but we can't seem to figure out how to grow food for people. It's not that these things don't exist, it's that the very existence of these solutions calls into question everything our leaders have been doing for the last 100 years. You know, if a farmer in Australia can figure out a way to manage the resources that are moving through his property 50 years ago, 60, 70 years ago, why has that not been adopted? You know what I mean? Like these people they're so quick to adopt military technology, but they don't want to make changes to the landscape that would improve the quality of life for the people and the animals and the plants. It's very simple. There's a very simple measuring stick, and it's, does it work? Does it? What's the outcome? Is it improving people's lives? Because there's modalities, there's healing modalities out there that they don't have any negative side effects compared to what these pharmaceuticals have. It's practically zero. But it's not, they're not looking for cures, they're looking for profit, they're looking for control. They want people to continue to live in this sheltered, uh yeah, they want people to keep living in the bomb shelter. And so it starts with you, it starts with me. And yeah, formalizing these things to create some kind of a, we're gonna it's coming. Change is coming. And I know I'm not the only one who's working on these things, but I definitely am tired of. No, I'm not tired. It's just it's a time. It's the time for these things to begin, because we do have the technology, because we do have the ability and the capacity to connect and align our our minds, our hearts, and our resources to create the world that we want to see, the create the world that we know is possible and that we all believe that we can have. And you know, and on that note, I'm just going to end with this. If you go to the UN website and you go to the World Health Organization website and you go and you look at what these people are saying and the language that they're using surrounding solving a lot of these problems, and how it's going to be hard and it's going to be tough and it's going to be all of this kind of stuff, like somewhere on there it says it's like it may not even be possible. Now, can you imagine Phil Jackson or any high level sports coach telling his team that it's may not be possible to win? That dude would get fired immediately. at the very least, his players are not going to have any confidence in anything that he says. But that's what these people are doing. These people are telling us how hard it's going to be and how this and how that, when a lot of these solutions already exist. A lot of these problems have already been solved. So, how is it that these major institutions with all these resources are unwilling not just to see these solutions, but to adopt them? And something else that I want to mention is too, it's kind of ironic that a lot of these fires are started allegedly by down power lines. Meanwhile, they want to turn all these cities electric. Like, doesn't that just seem a little weird? Doesn't it sound weird? You know, the downed power lines are the reason for the fires, but they want to turn everything into a smart. They want to make smart cities. Like, just think about this stuff. Like, when you stop and think about it, and when you remove a lot of the emotions from it, a lot of these things are just so blatant. It's just so obvious how dumb it is. You know, California, even what Joe Biden was saying, how they want to make 50% electric vehicles by 2050 or 20 whatever, or in California they're going to stop selling combustion engines, and it's like they're talking out both sides of their mouth, people, and it's just so obvious that the solution is not listening to them. Whatever the solution is, it's not going to come from them. You know what I mean? So I'm gonna leave that there, and yeah, if you are the kind of person who wants to take this to another level, I'm starting to realize that part of what I'm here to do is advocate for life. I'm a life advocate. I'm not just here to um, entertain people or um, you know do cool fun stuff. Like, I'm an advocate for life, and I help people make sense of things that there's a lot of fog around, there's a lot of confusion around. And not only that, but I help people move through this process of not just healing yourself, but like reconciling your reality. Like when you come to terms with what's going on, and you want to, helping people to release this anger and release a lot of this pain and this PTSD and move through this process of awakening, because it's a you know it is an awakening. It's a spiritual awakening. And when you begin to realize what you are and how much power you truly have, then you can progress down this journey of self-awareness and self-realization and self-actualization, which allows you to then do that for other people. And so that's what I do, is I help people move from this feeling, this state of hopelessness, into a state of empowerment. And it's not just by forgetting about all of the truth that you know through experience. It's not about just burying this stuff and going back to business as usual. It's about how do you maintain your integrity and live in alignment with what you know to be true on a spiritual level, and do it in a way that honors you and your soul's path here on earth, and moves us forward so that we can create the kind of world that we know to be possible. The world that we know is right there available for us on a deeper level. So that's something that you'd be interested in. Feel free to reach out to me. All right. Wishing you all the best, guys. Stay focused. All right. It's not just about prayer, but it's about releasing these triggers that you have, and pulling off these buttons and switches that are are old. It's not. It's it. You know. it's an easy thing to do. I mean, it's simple, but it's not easy. It does take a little bit of effort, but once you start the process, you start to realize like how you start to see the improvements in your life and how you feel and how much more powerful you feel, and that is valuable. All right. So if that's something that you'd be interested in, feel free to reach out to me. I use lots of different healing modalities and there's there's lots of tools that are available to help move down this road, um, through the tunnel, towards the light at the end of the tunnel. All right. But yeah, love you. Sending much love to you, your family, your loved ones. I hope everyone's safe. And stay positive and stay focused on what you want to see more of. All right. Peace.